I want to join in Mark's welcome of everyone, and especially our returning and new college students. Just one more brief thing about that. The next 2 to 4 years of your life are going to really set the trajectory of the rest of your life. I know there's a temptation when you finally set free from home and you're on your own to want to just kind of go your own way. But I can tell you story after story of people who've done that, and it didn't go really well. And I can tell you other stories, and this building is full of stories of people who decided when they came to Western that they were going to get connected with a local church, that they were going to become a part of what was going on, devote their lives to Christ. And not a single one of them would tell you this morning that they have any regrets about that decision. And I want your future to be full of no regrets. I want your future to be full of the life of Christ, and all of that can be yours. Whether it's here at Lost River or another good local church, you commit yourself to that body of believers. Get connected, know the people, know the elders. And here at Lost River, I'll tell you, we've got people who will pour as much into you as you have the capacity to receive. And so please be a part and let us know how we can help you. Let us get to know you, and we'll do everything we can to make the next several years of your life as good as they can possibly be. We're in the middle of a series of lessons. If I can go back, a series of lessons that we're calling The Way of Jesus, The Way of Jesus. And it's based on a statement that Jesus makes in Matthew 11. But to be honest, it's an invitation that Jesus extends to come and follow him in the way of life that he is living. And it's an invitation that Jesus makes that's not going to appeal to everyone. It's an invitation to everyone, but it's not an invitation that is necessarily going to appeal to everyone, at least not at every moment in their lives. There are some people who are putting on the yoke of the world, and they have not yet chafed under that yoke, and they have not yet felt the oppressive burden of that world's yoke to the degree that they're looking for some relief. But to those who have tried and worn those yokes and found them to be lacking, Jesus' invitation is beautiful. And he says, "Come to me. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Last week, Jarrett talked about the restorative solitude and the generative community that Jesus participated in, as he would often go to lonely places to be alone in solitude with God and be refilled and restored so that he could enter back into community with his disciples, his friends, and have a fruitful relationship where he was known and where he knew people. And it was such a generative thing for him. And if we follow Jesus, we're going to follow him into solitude. We're going to follow him into community. And this morning we're going to see that if we follow the way of Christ, it is the way of giving and receiving. And this is in contrast to the prevailing attitudes of our day, which is a scarcity mindset. The scarcity mindset is the mindset that says, I'm on my own. It's totally up to me. And there are only limited resources of things and people and love or whatever is in the world that I'm wanting. And so I'm going to go after that with all I've got. And it's all dependent on me to grasp and to get and hoard as much of those things as I can and hold on to them, because they're very scarce commodities. And so this is the philosophy of Captain Jack Sparrow, who says, take what you can, give nothing back. That's the mindset of scarcity. But in contrast to that, Jesus invites us into a different way. A way of life that is marked by abundance. A way of life in which we says there is a God in heaven. And the resources that are at his disposal are truly unlimited. He is an infinite reservoir who can give beyond my capacity to receive. And so I can live my life open-handed and receive from my loving Father all of the blessings that He has in mind for me, and then I can extend them out and share with others as much as I possibly can. And God will flow through me to others the blessing of life. And so this is the way of Christ. This is the way that Jesus lived His life. Freely, He says, I have received, freely I give. And it is more blessed, you'll be happier if you give than if you just receive. Now, on one occasion, while Jesus was teaching, we see this idea brought into the foreground. It's found in Luke chapter 12. And in Luke chapter 12 and verse 13, there were thousands of people around. Jesus is communicating primarily to His disciples in this context. But as He's teaching them, someone in this crowd, it says in verse 13, said to Him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." It's just such an interesting scene. You know, Jesus is there having serious teaching conversation, and then somebody just shouts out of the crowd this message. And I'm told in my research that it's not necessarily uncommon in the first century for a Jewish rabbi to be called upon by people to ask them to give guidance or arbitration in settling legal disputes, including things like inheritance. And so this question wasn't necessarily out of place, but it was out of place in the sense that it's happening in a way that's rather awkward, right in front of everybody. Tell my brother to share with me the inheritance. And I love Jesus' response to this. He says in the next verse, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Again, put yourself in the scene. It's such an interesting and curious scene. Now, I don't think Jesus is saying that the man he should just drop this, that he shouldn't pursue it any further. It was proper for someone to receive an inheritance when their parents passed away. And maybe this is a younger brother whose older brother who is already receiving the double portion is unwilling to even part with the lesser amount and distribute to his younger brother the thing that was coming to him. And so Jesus doesn't tell him that he shouldn't seek counsel to try to get what belongs to him, but He says, that's not what I'm here for. And in fact, Jesus is going to give him something that is far more valuable than the family farm that he's hoping to inherit. And it's something that Jesus gives him in terms of teaching that also He's giving to us, that I hope that we can lean into and listen. This is something better, in other words, than a big inheritance that you might be hoping some way that distant relative passes away and surprisingly leaves you that fortune. This is something that's better than that. What Jesus has to offer is better even than that. And so here's what He says. I'm not going to get involved in arbitrating between you and your brother, but I will tell you this. Watch out. Be on your guard. That's kind of a double saying. Watch out and be on your guard. Beware and put your guard up against all kinds of greed. In other words, Jesus is not necessarily accusing this man of greed, but perhaps the way he just interrupts Jesus' teaching with this being the most pressing thing on his mind suggests that maybe he has a little bit too much interest in this situation. And Jesus just says, hey, the main thing that you need to think about before you worry about what's fair in life or whether you're getting your fair share, the first priority that you need to guard against and beware of in your heart is the tendency of human beings toward greed. The gimme mindset. The scarcity mindset. There's only so much. I got to get what I can. I got to keep it. I got to give nothing back. Guard against that, Jesus says. And then He tells us why. And this next line is one of the most powerful phrases. For some reason in my life, this word that Jesus gives next has resonated in my mind. I have not always lived it out, but it just sticks in my mind. He says that your life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Or as I learned it in the New King James, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. Do you believe that? Do you believe that your life is more than just the accumulation of stuff that you can acquire in your lifetime? What do we give our thoughts to? What do we give our muscle to? What do we give our attention to? Is it not so frequently how I can acquire an abundance of possessions? And we daydream about what it would be like if I could just acquire an abundance of possessions. Then I could truly live. And Jesus cuts against that and says, no, life is not about, and your life is not about the abundance of possessions that you can acquire. You know, I've known people, as I think about this odd situation of this man interrupting Jesus' teaching with his question about an inheritance, and Jesus responding this way. And I think about some instances in my life. I remember one time very vividly being at the hospital and hearing a family outside of a room of a man who had just died, literally arguing over who was going to get what. Can you imagine that? Your dad just died and now you're just having it out with your siblings about who's going to get what. And I have known more than one family that has literally been torn apart over disputes and arguments about who gets what in the inheritance. Their lives, the things in life that actually matter, are being ripped to shreds as they do not guard their hearts against greed. And they think that that life is going to be made up of the abundance of stuff that they could possess. But Jesus tells us to think differently. Now, when you think about this, before we proceed further in Jesus' teaching, just pause for a moment and put it in this perspective. There's a heavy yoke of worldly thinking that says that your life consists of getting your fair share of the inheritance, getting what's coming to you. There's a heavy burden of worldly thinking that tells you that it's the house you live in or the neighborhood that you're able to step up to that's really going to make your life meaningful or worth the while. Or it's just the money that I make and the money that I can save and all the ways that I can arrange protecting my money so I can have the security that I think money is going to bring. Or maybe it's just our image that we want to portray and that we want to keep up by the way that we dress and all the things that go with it. But I want you to notice this, and why I call it the heavy burden of worldly thinking, is that all of these things, and so many more like them, can be taken away or lost in an instant. All of these things can go away in a moment. They are like a vapor. And if we're leaning the weight of our existence and life and thinking that our life consists of, or what makes my life matter is these kinds of things, then of course we're going to be anxious. Of course we're going to be worried. Of course we're going to be striving and chafing under the heavy burden of trying to acquire and fight for and defend ourselves in our scarcity mindset. This is the life of the person lived without regard to God, without the belief that there is a God in heaven who can bless and take care of us. And so all of those kinds of things are a heavy burden to those who try to live that way. But Jesus' restful yoke reminds us of what life actually consists of. Things like an inheritance that my heavenly Father has for me, reserved in heaven, that's imperishable, incorruptible, and that fades not away. It's the relationships that I enjoy with the people that God has put into my life. It's the sufficiency of God's daily provision, not the pile of money that I can acquire or the things that I can secure for myself. It's the beauty, not of an image that I try to project, but the beauty of a soul that is truly shaped and formed by a life of faith and open-handed generosity. None of those things can be taken away because they are all secure in the Father's hand. And so that's why it's not a heavy burden, the things that Jesus calls us and invites us to. It's a light burden, and it doesn't rub us the wrong way. And so when he tells us that we need to be on our guard against covetousness and greed, and that life doesn't consist in the abundance of things that we possess, he's not content just to leave that sitting there as if that statement of truth were not enough. It ought to be, but he goes a next step and he tells us a story. It says in verse 16 that he told them a parable. He wants to make sure that this principle, this idea, gets firmly fixed in our minds. And he says that the ground of a certain rich man, this isn't an actual event of something that happened, but Jesus is telling a story of the kind of thing that does happen all the time. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. This is second world problems, I guess. We've got our first world problems. This guy had his second world problems, and he didn't know what am I going to do? I've got a big problem. I've got so much grain that I can't eat it all. There's more than I have. I've been blessed with an abundance that I don't have the capacity to receive. So I've got a problem. What am I going to do? And so he's going to have to come up with a plan. Now, I know that most of us are not farmers, and perhaps this agricultural illustration falls a little bit flat. So imagine him closing the deal that paid more than 2 times his annual salary. What am I going to do with all the money that I just made? Or maybe he hit big on his investment. It's a 10x investment. Or maybe he has received that inheritance from that distant relative that he wasn't expecting, and it's exceeded all of his wildest imagination. Whatever it is, he has received an abundance, a surplus, and he doesn't know what he's going to do about it. And so it says in verse 18 that he said to himself, well, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. I'm just going to kick back, take it easy. I'm going to go into early retirement. But his unquestioned assumption in this statement is that everything that comes to me is for me. And just look at the pronouns that he uses in his inner dialogue. As he's thinking through his problem and coming up with his solution, look at how he goes about this. Again, it says, he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, I know it's getting annoying. Imagine how annoying it was to God. This is the internal dialogue that this man is running through, and it is 100% self-centered, self-referential. The concerns or needs of his community and neighbors never enters his calculation. And then suddenly, as he's daydreaming about what he's going to do with his surplus, someone else that he's forgot to think about in his calculations interrupts. And it says that God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? All his material gain couldn't extend his life a single day. And none of the goods that he stored up were going with him into the life that he was entering into. And so, by Jesus' own teaching, we rightly call this man the rich fool. But it's not just him. Because in verse 21, Jesus wraps this up by saying, "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." And so the story of the rich fool is a story that has been told millions of times over. But I want us to focus on the fundamental assumption that this man held to and that is still shared by most people, I would even say today. And that is that if it came to me, then it must be for me. If it comes to me, then it must be for me. That's what he is assuming throughout his story, isn't it? It's mine. I'm taking what I can. I'm giving nothing back. That came to me, it must be for me. It's there for my pleasure, for my consumption. And I need to have no regard for anyone or anything else other than how can I spend what I have acquired on me and for my benefit. But Jesus' story erodes that assumption by reminding us of something that I think we all know, but we willingly forget. And that is that the night that our life is required of us, every material possession will pass immediately into the hands of somebody else. There is nothing that you have that in just a very few years at most will not be out of your control entirely and in the hands of somebody else. Everyone who has ever cleared out their recently deceased parents' home understands this. So when you go home in just a few minutes and you walk through the front door of your house, I would encourage you, and I would encourage myself, to take a look around. Look at the house, look at the car that you rolled up in, look at all the furniture, the clothes, and all the art and everything else that exists in your house, and realize that in a really short period of time, somebody else is going to come into that residence and they're going to begin to pack things up. They're going to break some stuff. They're going to sell some stuff. They're going to take a few of the things that they might desire for themselves. They're going to give as much of it away as they can, and because there's going to be more of it than people want, they're going to end up burning or just donating or just trashing the rest. And somebody else will move into that house and they will assume control over your vast empire. How you doing this morning? Everybody chipper? Well, here's the point. We are stewards, because if it can be taken away from you, you never really owned it anyway. And is ownership really the right word to use to describe the things that God places into our hands? Wouldn't it be truer to say that we are stewards of the things God puts in our hands, not the owners? I mean, if you can't control their ultimate end, and you're going to pass away and they're going to pass into the control of someone else, can you ever really say that they were yours to control to begin with? The fact is, we are stewards who manage the resources that God puts into our hands, not the final and ultimate owner. And we are accountable to God, the giver of every good and perfect gift, for the way that we make use of the blessings that He pours into our lives. God has so much more in mind for you and for me than simply being consumers and hoarders of things. In 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7, we're told that God loves a cheerful giver. I take that to mean, at least in part, that he delights to put things into the hand of people that he knows he can trust to be open-handed and share with others. God looks at that kind of person and says, well, that's where I want to direct my resources, because they live with an abundance mentality. They freely receive and they freely give. They're not people who take what they can and give nothing back, but they see themselves as living under the blessing of an infinite giver who's given me this much and he can give me that much more. And so what I have, I can enjoy, but I can also distribute and see to it that it goes to the places and the people and the causes that need to be served. And I am a steward responsible for God with everything that he puts in my hand. So God gets excited when he sees someone with this attitude. I love the illustration. There's an old song. I don't think the melody's all that great, but the lyrics are really good. And it tells about two lakes, two bodies of water in Israel. And when we were there a few years ago, we witnessed this firsthand. First, in the north, there is the Sea of Galilee, which is a misnomer. It's really a lake. It's a freshwater lake. It's a beautiful lake, teeming with life. There's trees that grow around on the shore. The water is full of fish and aquatic life. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. And it is fed by a variety of streams and springs. But it also has an outlet at the southern end that we know of as the Jordan River. And it flows from there down south into what we call the second body of water, the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is one of the lowest places on earth. It's below sea level, and there is no outlet. And so the Dead Sea receives this fresh, vibrant, life-giving water into it, but it has no outlet. And so as evaporation takes place, the mineral concentration grows greater and greater, and it is a lifeless, sterile, properly named Dead Sea. Which of those two are we more like? Do we live with an abundance mentality that I'm freely receiving and I can freely give? Or are we more like the Dead Sea with its scarcity mentality? Take what I can and give nothing back. Well, I want to close this morning by reading the rest of what Jesus says, which are some challenging words to us. He says in Luke chapter 12 again, beginning in verse 22, several verses, but listen carefully. He's just told this story about this man in response to the question about the guy, give me my inheritance. So Jesus says, again, turning to his disciples, and hopefully that includes you and me, his followers, those who are wanting to be with Jesus and become like Jesus so that we can do the kinds of things that Jesus did. He says to us, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn. Yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his splendor was not dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, oh, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things. But your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. I'm telling you, that's a sentence right there that'll change your life if you understand what it means. If the Lord is your shepherd, you learn, you know that you will never lack for anything. So he says, sell your possessions and give them to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, and where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The Lord wants our hearts, and He knows that our hearts follow the money. And if all of our thoughts are about how we can acquire and how we can keep the goods of this world, it is no wonder that our minds spend so little time thinking about the joys and the glories of the life to come. And Jesus says, I don't want that for you. I want something so much more. Open your hands. Receive the blessings God is pouring out and distribute them freely to those that you know are in need, and live in the abundance of the kingdom of heaven. Your Father knows, your Father sees, your Father takes care of you. Now, the least that we can do is we can budget. What a way to end a sermon, huh? A budget. But it's so important. Decide first what you're going to give away. Decide what you need to save for a rainy day. Enjoy the rest, but make your priority, Lord, you have blessed me so richly. Open my heart and open my treasury that I may be a blessing to others. And we're never going to be able to do that. We're never going to get there until our hearts are melted by this reality that Paul calls the Corinthians' attention to when he was taking up a collection for needy Christians in Judea. And he said, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich beyond any of our imaginations, by the way, yet for your sake, He became poor, so that through His poverty, we might become rich. This is the way of Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus means to model the way of life of your Master. We've got to fix our eyes on Jesus. Not think that our life consists of the abundance of things we possess, but learn to live with that abundance mentality of freely we have received, freely we give, just like the Lord Jesus. You're never going to do that without Jesus. So if you are not a Christian, we want to encourage you to shed the yoke that has rubbed you raw and weighed you down, and take up the yoke of Jesus that's light and His burden is easy. If we can help you do that and can put Him on in baptism this morning, we'd be delighted to help. In any way that we can, why don't you let us know while we stand and while we sing.